So we would say welcome to everybody to the first of our presentations for 2022. And today we have a presentation by an Irish photographer, Gerry Andrews. Before we start, I know Ricardo Busi, our president, would like to say a few words to everybody. So I shall give the microphone over to Ricardo.
Thank you, dear Paul. So, dear photography friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this 16 events of the FIAP Photo Academy, the first of this new year. We decided to start with this new season of events with one of our EFIAP author, an Irish photographer, and a dear friend of many of us, Gerry Andrews. Gerry is a Dublin-based photographer whose passion for photography started when he was 19 years old. And today, a few years older, he's ready to share his experience and these beautiful pictures with all of us. So thank you, dear Gerry, for accepting our invitation on my own behalf, on behalf of the entire board of directors of the International Federation of Photographic Art, and on behalf of the 116 friends coming from 31 different countries over 4 continents who have decided to take part in our FIAP event today. I wish you, dear friend, a great success for your presentation. And as always, I will now hand the floor to my friend and director of the FIAP Photo Academy online events, Paul Stanley, who I'm sure will be able, in particular this time, to introduce our Irish guest better than anyone else. So, dear friends, enjoy your event and see you later. Ciao.
Thank you, Ricardo. And welcome to everybody. I know we have some people here joining us from as far away as Los Angeles, where it is just after 7 a.m. in the morning, all the way through to people from Bangladesh, 6 a.m. I beg your pardon, Joanne. I can show you how good my maths are. And even as far as Bangladesh, where it is much later in the evening. So you are all very, very welcome, and it's great to see you here. As Ricardo was saying, we are being joined today by a friend and a colleague of mine, Gerry Andrews, who is an Irish-based photographer, and he's based here in Dublin, the capital of Ireland, on the east coast, but he originally comes from Limerick, which is a city just down on the west coast of Ireland. And that's where he was born, where he grew up, and where I won't tell you what he's going to be doing, other than to say that the photographs he's going to be showing us all originate from that city. And it's a project that has been ongoing for the last 50 years. And it's a project that Gerry has had great success with, including 2 major exhibitions in Limerick and in Dublin in the National Photographic Archive. His exhibition in the Hunt Museum in Limerick broke all records with the number of people who attended to see the exhibition. He also published a book, Shaped by History, and it was a sellout. No copies now available at all, and it was awarded Book of the Year at the Irish Print Awards when it came out in 2012. So in addition to all of that, Gerry is also a member of the Dublin Camera Club. He's a past president of the club, and he holds his fellowship from the Irish Photographic Federation. He also has his EFIAP, and he's also an associate of the Royal Photographic Society. He's had lots of solo exhibitions here in Ireland of his images, including a second exhibition in the Hunt Museum of his images from around the world. But today it is his images from the Limerick milk market that he will be telling us about and showing to us. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to give a very, very big welcome to Gerry and hand the microphone over to him. So Gerry, where you go. Gerry, you're muted. Don't forget.
I was muted. Sorry. Okay. Afternoon, everybody, and greetings from Dublin. First of all, thank you to the FIAP Academy and Ricardo and his colleagues for the invitation to be with you today. It's indeed a privilege for me to be here and to share some of the images that, frankly, go back a few years, and I'll bring you up to date with my progress on that project. Paul, I'll just share the screen now, if that's okay, yeah?
That's perfectly fine, Gerry, yes.
Okay. Right, have you got that?
It's starting, but hasn't gone there yet.
Have you got it, Paul?
I see, Paul.
You seen it?
It's there.
Yes.
I see it as well, yeah.
Are you
it's up.
okay?
Yeah, I'm back now. I don't know what happened there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly, Paul, but can you see my screen?
Yes, indeed. I can indeed. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, just to kick off, the title of my project is Shaped by History. And because we are all of us shaped by our history in some shape or form, history influences us. And I was very much attracted to photography. Oh gosh, sorry, Paul, something wrong here, is not moving forward. Just bear with me a second.
Okay.
I'm going to close this. All right. Yeah, I just bear with me, just getting a bit. Can you share your screen? Yeah. Which is. I think that's it. Yeah, but I'm not going to. Sorry, guys.
I've got an image.
Let's close it down. Sorry, I'm just going to
You've got IT support there, Gerry.
hopefully so, yeah. Just bear with me a second. It was working just before we started.
It was, yes. Don't forget, Gerry, that I have them here, so I could always share
Yeah.
them if you wanted.
I think we're okay.
Okay, great.
I think. All right. So we can share the screen.
We see the
Okay.
screen. We see the screen.
Listen, I'm really sorry about that. Just as well to have tech support on hand. So you guys can see that screen all right now?
We can
Yes, indeed.
Gerry. Yes.
Okay, and I'm moving on. All
Perfect.
right. Before I was rudely interrupted by technology, my worst nightmare. Well, basically, what I was about to say was that my journey in photography started as a 19-year-old photographer, as a 19-year-old living in Limerick. And I came across this image by Eugene Smith. It's a photograph taken in Mcnamara of Tomoko and her mother, and a project that Smith did for the Japanese, where there was mercury poison in Mcnamara, and this was an image that he took, and it captured me. It resonated with me in such a way that it really impacted significantly. I was very much influenced by the dramatic composition, by the mastery of lighting, by that overall power of the photograph. And it was Smith's ability to tell a story through photography that really influenced me. And that one image prompted me to read everything I could about Eugene Smith and to buy a camera. And armed with the enthusiasm that I had received from studying Smith and his life and his photographs, I set out on a project, and I was looking to see what can I do locally where I can record a story that effectively had meaning, a story that resonated with my local people in Limerick and would reflect more or less what was a disappearing Ireland. But I zoned in on the Limerick Milk Market, a crumbling building, as you can see, little or nothing to attract you to it, other than the fact that this was a weekly market that took place. And in order to give a context, I just need to share a screen with you. And if you look at Ireland and the location of Limerick, just on the coast there, I'll draw your attention to a famine that took place in Ireland back in 1845 to 1852. At that time, we had a population of 8.5 million people in Ireland. And during the famine period, which was a blight of the potato crop, over 1.5 million people died as a result of that famine. We had a huge dependency on agriculture, and potato was a staple diet. 1.5 million people, as I say, died, and over 1 million people emigrated. The population in Ireland back in 1845 was 8.5 million people. Today it stands at 5 million. So we never got back to those numbers. But back in the day when I photographed the milk market, I choose to go to a location that had links to that disappearing Ireland. It was at a time when Ireland was in transition. It was only 50 years since we had received our independence as a state. And Ireland at this moment in time, as I say, was in transition. And I wanted to photograph the people that frequented the Limerick market as they evolved from our rural past and our rural community. As I say, it was to record a vanishing Ireland, because this was not reflective of Ireland in the 70s, but only a portion of Ireland, a portion of Limerick, my native city. And I set out to photograph the people in their environment. And one such person was Mary White. Excuse me. Mary White was close to 100 years of age when she died. She lived a very Spartan life on the outskirts of Limerick. She had no family members. She was the last remaining person in her family. And to put it into context, Mary survived the tail end of the famine. Her mother had been born during famine times. She survived that post-famine period. She went through colonial rule. She suffered through the War of Independence. She suffered through a civil war. And she went through 2 world wars. And 100 years later, Mary died, lonely, living in isolation on the outskirts of Limerick. And her only outlet on a weekly basis was her visit to the Limerick market. When she died, just 8 people were available to shoulder her coffin. And everybody was looking to find where the family plot was. For me, Mary White resembles or signifies resilience, hardworking, determined people that frequented the market as I set out to photograph this place. It was really a farming community where on a weekly basis, people would travel in all modes of transport, bringing their livestock in order, hoping to sell the efforts of a week's toil in the fields. Invariably, it meant hanging around, hoping to sell the one and only turkey, chicken, whatever it might be, to a discerning buyer. Ultimately, you had abject poverty, because bearing in mind this was a portion of Ireland that was at a cusp. And you can see from this image, and bear with me in terms of the technology at the time, I was using film camera and was grabbing photographs as I could in poor lighting conditions. And sometimes the lighting conditions wasn't very helpful in taking images. But anyway, it was to record the period of time, and you can see the cracked Wellington boots that this lad has, and that poverty as he struggled with his animals. Invariably, there was always mayhem, where children were running around the place trying to catch animals that had escaped, but they always made their way to the hands of the executioner. The turkey plucker, effectively, he charged a silver shilling, as he called it, in order to kill and pluck a turkey. Discount was applied if he broke the skin, but invariably you had feathers flying all over the place as there was a struggle between the turkey plucker and the animal, a struggle to the death. And it was a game of patience where farmers sat idly by, hoping, as I say, that they would sell their produce to any discerning buyer that happened by. They spent many hours standing, waiting, hoping, praying, knowing that at the end of that effort, they'd go back to their fields and toil in the fields in the traditional way. There was only one opportunity every week to sell their produce, and that opportunity came on the Saturday. But the market was more than just a place of commerce. It was also a place of social activity. It was a place where people congregated. A sense of community was very vibrant in Limerick. And that age-old tradition in Ireland of having a gossip was very much evident as people gathered on Saturdays in clusters of men and women, just having a chat, having a gossip, having the weekly get-together. This particular man, Paddy Dunn, he spent his entire life avoiding a family photograph being taken. His family discovered that I had taken this image after his death. He had 7 children. They had never had a photograph until this one was discovered after he had died. And these were the kind of people that frequented the market. They came from a farming community. But like all communities, you had the shopkeepers essentially that surrounded that marketplace. Nessie Colopy, this lady, ran a secondhand clothes shop, 3 stories high. There was no roof to the house. the top 2 floors were derelict. Everything was crammed in to the bottom floor, and she was hoping that she would keep that shop going until eventually the corporation were going to demolish it. Mr. Delaney effectively had the pride of making a basket for, he claimed, for every newborn child in Limerick, while just down the road, this man set out to make a tombstone for everybody that might pass through his hands on the way to the local cemetery. There was plenty of craftspeople surrounding the marketplace. You had the traditional engravers and the welders. But invariably, like in all communities, you had the poorest of the poor. The socioeconomic divide between those that have and those that have not was evident, even at the lowest level. These are members of the traveling community standing outside a local church, hoping to get a few pennies from those that pass by. Three children of the traveling community have photographed as they traveled through a lane, passed through a lane at the milk market on their way home. And it was very much mindful of Smith's type of photography, that it was intense, it was engaging. And he made a claim that he said that, what is the point in having great depth of feel if you have no depth of feeling? So there was a pathos, an empathy in those children that I wanted to capture. And conscious of Smith saying, what's the point of depth of field if you don't have depth of feeling? I wanted to do the best I could to tell that story in my images. One of the things that I started from the beginning was that bond between the subject and myself in order to build up trust, in order to make sure there was engagement, in order to make sure that I was aligning myself with the person I was photographing and telling the story as I saw it through the lens. Like all communities, the poorest of the poor shared what little they had with those that were within their circle. And they lived in abject poverty in a traditional way, in the old traditional caravans that were commonplace during that period. No longer visible now. And there was the matriarch of the community. She effectively was the grandmother. She was the fortune teller. She was the bond that held that community together. And you'll notice in her hand the traditional claddagh rings and the ubiquitous pipe. But the strength of character in these people were clearly evident to me. There was this history etched in their face from months, from years of toil in the land under the hard winter, summer Irish landscape, and they worked from morning to night. This lady laughed at me as I got up close and personal to take this image. And I always remember her saying to me, they're not wrinkles, love, they're just laughter lines. These were the people that I became familiar with. These were the people that I had huge respect for. They were hardworking community, and you can see the hardship etched in their faces. Many of them were on the cusp of poverty, on the cusp of absolute destitution, as they struggled with their day-to-day existence, while not too far away Ireland progressed. As I say, you can see that hardship etched in the faces of these people. And it always amazed me as to how much enjoyment people used to get out of that last drag from a Woodbine cigarette. It was their only source of pleasure, their only source of enjoyment. And my God, did they extract the most they could from that cigarette. It just seemed to suck their cheeks in as they drew on that treasured piece of tobacco. And I remember at the time questioning myself as to whether it was right to take these images. And I had this conversation with my father. Remember, I was just 19. And he instilled in me the fact that once I did it with the right intentions, once I didn't set out in any way to degrade people, to show them as they were, to be truthful to them, to accept that this was the university of life, and to learn from the people I saw, and to apply that knowledge as I went forward in life. And the children that grew up there, it was their university. They watched, they observed, they listened, and they saw. And they saw the deprivation that existed and what was necessary in order to make sure that they wouldn't be part of that future. They lived their lives on the street. They learned the hard way. They learned the honest way. There was plenty of integrity, decency, hardworking. And the one thing that always struck me as I grew up in this community was how willing people were to share what little they had with those less fortunate than themselves. It was the university of life, where people had this community, a sense of community, and a sense of I suppose they were very much from a farming stock, and they were making that transition into a modern Ireland. And they lived, these young kids did, amongst derelict buildings, as they struggled their day-to-day lives amongst ruins that were being demolished by the corporation. And they lived their lives, as I say, on the street. But like all things, modern fashion started to come to bear, and Carnaby Street and the rocking era started to influence those that were there. And these guys were mods at the time. You can see them with their denim and their tall hats. But what always intrigued me was the innocence of it all, with their pints of milk. Fashion was this lad's thing. And the community policeman was always on hand to overlook and oversee what was going on, to ensure that things always stayed on the straight and narrow. This was Limerick's answer to Cartier-Bresson. And music was a fundamental part of the market, where people would spend hours on end playing whatever instruments they had in order to make a few pennies, trying to make a living, trying to survive. This particular man, Hanta Dunn, he was blind. So were his two brothers. The three of them, musicians, were claimed by those that are very knowledgeable and influential in the Irish music field, claim that they were the most accomplished musicians they had ever come across. They could play every instrument under the sun. They couldn't read, obviously, music because they were blind, but they had an ear for music. And these people were directly influential in the famous Fury brothers taking up Irish music. And then you had these two sisters that struggled from dawn until dusk, opening and closing their shop, trying to sell a few bits and pieces, trying to make a living. When they died, that shop was demolished. There was no other member of that family line. And there's the story of Hannah, who essentially, Hannah maintained that God would move her before the corporation would evict her. She stood steadfastly in her home and refused to get out of the way when the corporation were moving forward with a demolition order. This is how she lived her life. This was her life. Nobody was going to move her. And it always resonated with me when I took an image at the time, the story that I wanted to try and depict when I was photographing that image. I remember at the time as a young man looking at these two elderly ladies make their way home from market. And I was very much, I suppose, conscious of the suffering and pain, the anguish and the anxiety of that lady on the right-hand side with her ulcerated legs as she struggled back from market with her weekly shopping. These were the people that influenced me as I grew up. These were the people that effectively represented a vanishing Ireland, one of whom was this lady, Kate Hassett. She was the last Shawley in Limerick. And a Shawley is a disparaging word for the poorest of the poor, but it has a historical connection with the siege of Limerick back in 1690. That history wasn't lost on me as I photographed the last remaining Shawley in Limerick as she struggled on her way home with her market from the market on a Saturday morning. Invariably, they make their way to the bus station, make their way along railway tracks on the way home through the snow, past the local graveyard, past the grove of trees that I used to run as a boy, where I ran as an athlete, a place embedded in my memory. And then there was this man living just on the outskirts of Limerick, a tinsmith who spent most of his week making pots and pans to sell in the marketplace. His name was Joseph. His wife's name was Mary. I took that photograph Christmas Eve, 1972. This was his home. His one and only child, a young girl, lived in the local convent because he couldn't provide for her. This was a disappearing Ireland, and many of us were glad to see the back of it. But today, the market is a thriving place. It has been regenerated and rejuvenated and rebuilt, maintaining the original fabric, maintaining its traditional location, and maintaining that traditional spot for the people of Limerick to visit on a weekly basis. Back in the day, you could see the crumbling buildings. Back in the day, you could see that this was a danger. Health and safety wasn't in anybody's mind back then. Now, it's rejuvenated, it's regenerated, it's vibrant. The limestone has all been cleaned up, it's all been freshened up, There's a color, there's a vibrance, and there's the music. Invariably, there's the music. There's always the buskers. A modern market, an inviting market, a multicultural society right now that has attracted so many foreign nationals selling foreign produce. Back in 1971, I photographed Bridget Duffy. She started a stall when she was 19 years of age, selling fruit and veg. She passed that on to her daughter, who in turn passed that on to the granddaughter. And she in turn has passed this on to the fourth generation. 4 generations of one family in one location, in one small marketplace, in one small town in Ireland, providing for their family. They worked hard. Bridget Duffy couldn't read or write. This is her grandson, Ray. Ray's an engineer. And Ray told me that while his grandmother couldn't read or write, she said she was passing on the gift to all of her family. That gift was an ability to make money. Today, her grandchildren, many of them are hugely prosperous, very successful business people, multimillionaires who claim that they have been raised on the shadows of giants. Nessa Colopy was one such woman. Her grandson runs a stall there today. I took a photograph back in 1971 of Frank Hogan on his little horse called Little Vic. Today, Frank has spent his entire life in the market. Today, he's got a stall there. The little fellow is sitting on the left-hand side there, along with his dad and his uncles. Today, he sells firewood from a horse box in the marketplace. The tradition continues. And then there's Tom Mcnamara, Ireland's oldest busker at 84 years of age. He sits and squats, playing the accordion handed down to him by his father in the very location that his father sat and squatted and played that accordion all those years ago. Today at 84, Tom goes to the market every Saturday, and you can see alongside him the traditional farm, the farmer's wife selling duck eggs, while behind you've got the modern shopper. This was Tom's father in 1971. This is a photograph of Tom and his dad taken last year. The marketplace is an attractive place for those come from the traditional past. Many of them are direct descendants of those I photographed back in the 70s. Many of them sit in the very location that their forefathers sat in, selling the very products that their ancestors sold in a traditional way, traditional farmers, happy to stand, happy to carry on a tradition that has gone from generation to generation. And then you've got the stall holders who have a direct link back to when the market initially opened in 1855. Fishmongers who today carry on that tradition, selling their produce. And then you've got the vibrant, young, vibrant community that has come in with a variety of different products, different cheeses, It's an attractive location now for the youngsters of today. Gone is that abject poverty of the past, but the link remains, that deep-rooted link within Limerick to that historical past. And that community that has always gone and travelled to buy their produce on a Saturday, now I was conscious back then of undernourishment and the deprivation that existed. And when I look at some of the people that are visiting the market today, those are problems we don't have in today's society. And this is only 50 years after I photographed people on the cusp of poverty. Little did I think back then that there would be queues of people buying designer dog biscuits. How far we've come. It's a multicultural location, vibrant community, very inviting community, where the cappuccino is the order of the day. Anything that can be purchased there, from designer handbags to gourmet hot dogs, it's all available for you in the very location that people struggled to exist, struggled to survive, struggled to get some food only 50 years ago. And then you've got the traditional people that'll still come selling their bits and pieces, odds and sods, any remnants they might have, they're there to sell. Anything goes. So basically, in setting out to take photographs of the market as it is today, I wanted to get a direct link between old and new. And some of the people that are in the market today are direct descendants of those I photographed back in the 70s. And I wanted to make that connection and photograph them in a manner in which I would have photographed people back in the 70s. To have that engagement, to have that sense of communication with the person, with my subject, in order to tell that story of the Limerick market. And when converted to black and white, that person, I could have photographed him back in the 70s. He belongs in the 70s. So the characters are still there. That dignity, that determination is very evident in their faces. This man is a regular in the market, the all-seeing eye. He's a retired policeman. And this is the local community Garda, always present in the wings, overseeing what was going on. Market has always been a very, very inviting place for children. But instead of that abject poverty of the past, we now have that vibrance, the colors of modern garb. You don't see, thank God, anything that even resembles what we had to go through 50 years ago. And you've always got the characters. This guy intrigued me. One day he was there and he was juggling his knives. I always thought the little fella behind was waiting for this chap to decapitate himself, but anyway, he kept dropping it. He was the world's worst juggler. The following week, he was back with a tambourine singing songs. He was a better juggler. He couldn't sing, he hasn't a note in his head. But still, he's there to entertain, and he certainly does that. You've always got the characters, mixed bag, all to be seen. And I was struck by the fact that there is always poverty, there's always deprivation, there are always people on the cusp. But the contrast between the poverty of this man as he lays under a blanket and the technical, outdoor, high-tech store just behind him struck me as a little perverse. That behind those walls were everything this man needed, yet it was beyond his reach. And then you've got the heroes. You've got the Annie Curleys of this world. A retired nurse, she has spent her entire life running a stall in the milk market, trying to make some money in order to help the underprivileged. And she has a holiday camp for children on the outskirts of Limerick on the coast, where she brings people and teaches them how to swim. This has been her entire life. This has been her entire community. Those children are her children. She has spent her every waking moment considering how she can advance those children. And I spoke to her just before the pandemic, and her big fear was, what about the children? And as I photographed during the pandemic, I thought, well, how do you tell a story of a pandemic where everybody is hidden behind masks? You had those effectively who lived in fear, who hid themselves away, who were more or less disappearing into one another. And everybody responded in a different way. Those that were anxious, looking over their shoulder, wondering where to safe, wonder was it okay to go out, wonder was it okay to venture into a marketplace during a pandemic. You had people who were totally confused, didn't know how to wear these bloody masks. They struggled to come to grips with the best way in which to protect themselves. And then there was the acceptance. We grew to a point where we thought, let's get on with life. Let's go about our business. Let's not be beaten down by this disease. And people became their own individuals again, mixing in the marketplace where the crowds returned and business continued on as usual. Where people remained individuals behind a mask. Where people were trying to be stylish in spite of the mask. Where the eccentric, well, just remained eccentric, really. Where nothing was going to get in the way of Ireland, of the Irish celebrating the festive season. And where people might be constrained by the uniform of authority, but remained independent and individualistic within those constraints. You had people who were nonconformists who decided that they would stand in isolation from everybody else. They had their ways of expressing themselves. People that told a story irrespective of a mask. Free-thinking spirits. People who were original, who choose to color their hair to match their designer handbags. But it was always the colorful, always the people that stood as independent individuals amongst a group of faceless people. And then you had the maverick. He did things his way. I'd love to be his mother. Or father, for that matter. And then you had the free spirit, the stylish, that nothing was going to stand in the way of them expressing themselves in their style, in their fashion, in their way. This girl is Polish. She runs a stall in the market. She was hoping to become a doctor. She was studying, just doing her Leaving Cert examination in Ireland, hoping to get into university and become a doctor. But for now, she sells her wares in the market on a Saturday and happy to do so. And then you had the bohemian type who were nonconformists and did things their way. Happy, confident within a vibrant community. There's always the youthful, always the hopeful. They decide in the Irish, irrespective of the mask, nobody could ever say that that girl was anything other than Irish. A place where Irish eyes are always smiling. This is the milk market of today. This is my milk market. And that's my story. Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much, Gerry. An absolutely stunning, stunning presentation. There are comments coming in, which I'll tell you about now in a second. But if anybody has any questions for Gerry, please just send them in on the chat facility and I can pass them on to Gerry for you. But Gerry, it's an absolutely brilliant presentation. So many, many thanks on behalf of everybody here present for giving us this fantastic presentation. And the chat box is alive with comments from people saying about your brilliant images, absolutely stunning, how outstanding it is, and especially combined with the narrative that you had for each one of those images. I think it would be fair to say that everybody has been blown away with the quality of what we've seen, the images, the commentary, and the presentation that you have given us here today. So on behalf of everybody, Gerry, I would like to say a very, very, very big thank you for being with us today. And maybe we can give you a round of applause. No, it's a silent round of applause.
Thank you all.
That's it. I'm just waiting to see if anybody has any questions that they want to send in to you. And once we do that, I don't know if Ricardo wants to say anything at this stage.
Well, it's just an unbelievable presentation. So congratulations, dear Gerry, for your very interesting and beautiful presentation. A great, unique social documentary photography, able, I think, to capture the attention of all of us. So thank you. Well, this is Alexa. this is Alexa, the start. The So really, congratulations, dear Gerry. And thanks again for this nice evening.
Thank you so much, Ricardo.
Gerry, just some questions. I know you showed us some of the older images taken back in the 1970s, and they were obviously taken and captured on film. So how have you gotten them into digital? Is that a scan, or what way did you do it?
Yes, Paul. The images I took back in the 70s, I used a Pentax Batmatic camera. Majority of photographs were taken using a 135mm lens on Tri-X film. And I have scanned those negatives with an Epson scanner. So I've digitized the images. And yeah, so basically ran them through an Epson scanner. And I'm still discovering some of my old photographs. Actually, you know, as I throw through some of the images, I'm still coming up with some new ones. So yeah, it's a voyage of discovery every now and again.
I noticed, I mean, I've seen some of these before from you, and I did notice some of the older ones, the black and white ones. I hadn't seen those before, so they obviously are new ones that you're discovering and processing.
Yeah, they're new old ones, Paul.
Exactly. But are just adding to a fantastic body of work. The chat box is alive here, Gerry, with comments about how the stunning presentation and how much everybody seems to have enjoyed it. But don't seem to be sending in any questions. So it's one of those presentations, I think, where you've intrigued.
How lucky am I? Don't ask any technical questions now, guys. Actually, it's one of the things that I was very mindful of is that, you know, sorry, is one of the things I was mindful of, I suppose, was the conversion from negative to digital. It just lacks in the kind of quality that I'd like to try and achieve, but it is what it is. But interestingly enough, they have blown up to some amazingly large images, some of which are on display in the University of Limerick. And I was quite surprised that a 35mm would be successfully enlarged up to a 10-foot high print. It's quite astonishing to see. So the old technology is really good.
Okay. Some questions are coming in, Gerry. So Gabriel O'Shaughnessy wants to know, did you find a difference in attitude towards between the people taking pictures back then compared to taking pictures now?
I think back then I was just known as the young fellow with the camera. You never saw anybody with a camera in the milk market. Indeed, I was absolutely surprised to discover that nobody ever took photographs in the milk market because they didn't see it worthwhile place to photograph in. They saw it as being some place to be just forgotten about. It was there, but why would you photograph that place? Was more or less what was said to me at the time by my peers in camera circles. Back then, people were very inviting, and but photography and a camera was an unusual occurrence. Now everybody's got a camera. Everybody's taking photographs. So you can go, and so to answer Gabriel's question, the difference back then was you stood unique as a photographer taking the images. So therefore I always tended to have an audience wondering what I was up to. Whereas now you can fuse yourself into the background and nobody gives you a second glance, you know. But there is an element of mistrust now. People wonder as to why you're photographing, why you're taking those images. And I tell people that basically I'm completing a story. It's a bookend project that I've got to my life. Photographing as I set out in my career, and now coming towards the latter end of my days, I suppose. I just want to have the final chapter, and that's what I'm working on.
So Ivan wants to know, what about another book?
I know, Ivan. I don't know. I wouldn't rule it out. We'll have to wait and see. If the truth be told, the photographs you've seen this evening of the recent milk market, I haven't shown those to anybody before. And I was fearful that they mightn't stand up to scrutiny. Now, if the truth be told, I felt the very same about the first ones. So nothing changes. I haven't learned anything in life. But no, I think I would like to do the complete story, but I'll have to wait and see. I don't know.
Well, if you want my opinion, I think you have some fantastic images there from the recent ones, especially during the pandemic. Some really captured some fantastic images there. So I think maybe you do have a book in it, who knows. Ryan is asking me and saying, the comparison between the old and the new is surely technology, but what about your approach to photography? Has that changed?
No, my approach has not changed from the get-go. I suppose the one thing that I've always set out to do, and I do this no matter where, and I've traveled extensively, you know, no matter where I go, I would always engage with the subject. I always try to build up a rapport with the individual I'm taking photographs of. I would never like to do anything in a way that was deemed to be surreptitious. I wouldn't want to mistrust or to demonstrate any lack of trust by doing something in a way that didn't make me feel comfortable. And I certainly wouldn't want to take photographs of anybody in a disparaging way. And that was more or less how I set out to take images in the marketplace, and I haven't altered over the years. I would still hold the same values true today as I did back then.
So I think we have come to the end of the questions. So just some more comments. Simona Sabatini from Florence says that he saw Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, and he sees that in your photographs. Absolutely incredible. And other people are saying that absolutely stunning images, a fantastic vision from a 19-year-old photographer at the time. And also, here's another one, I think this is the best body of work and presentation I have ever seen. So I think we can sum up, Gerry, that it has been absolutely fantastic presentation from you here today. You've kept us all enthralled and intrigued. And on behalf of everybody, I'd like to say two things. One, a very big thank you for taking the time for being here with us, but more importantly, wish you all the best for whatever may be the eventual outcome of this will be, and hopefully it'll be a further book and maybe even an exhibition. So on behalf of everybody, Gerry, many, many big thank yous.
Thanks again, Paul, and thanks to Ricardo and the FIAP Academy for this invitation. It's been an honor and a privilege to have been the first Irishman to give such a presentation. And I just hope I haven't let the side down. So thanks, everybody, and good evening.
I don't think you've let the side down at all. No, definitely not.
Thank you, Gerry, and thanks for your nice presentation.
Thanks so much, Ricardo.
So, well, dear friends, thank you again for your participation. We are working on the planning for the next months, hoping to offer you valuable events. Once again, I would like to thank the director of the fiapphotoacademy online events, Paul Stanley, the media manager of the fiapphotoacademy, Reha Bidier, and our friends Joan Stolt and Burak Stembach for the splendid organization work. Looking forward to meeting you again in our fiapphotoacademy events. I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Many
you.
thanks, Ricardo. And
Thank you. Thank you.
that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.